You've seen those frames, the old newsreel footage where a tank burns amid the sands, a black column of smoke rising above it, as if the machine's very soul were breaking free. Most people scroll past those seconds, just war, just machinery, they think. But those who were inside heard something else. Metal doesn't ring when it dies, it screams. It's a scream the camera can't catch, but if you watch long enough, you start to hear it somewhere beneath your skin. Those who sat inside the Sherman remember it forever. Today you'll learn why that scream was heard so often, why American tanks that seemed invincible turned into traps, and why their crews, even knowing this, still climbed back inside again and again. After the First World War, America seemed to have gone deaf to the sound of tanks. People were more concerned with movie screens and stock reports than with armor and engines. Armored vehicles were left somewhere in the past, like museum relics. By 1939, the country had only a little more than 400 light machines. Not even tanks, but cavalry combat cars. Thin armor, a tiny gun, a tall body that could tip over on a bump. These machines looked more like training models than real combat vehicles. Meanwhile, Europe was rumbling. Germany, hiding behind treaties, was perfecting a new doctrine, blitzkrieg. For them, tanks weren't just armor, they were a fist that smashed through the front line. When the Wehrmacht swept through Poland, the world understood. The era of long, static fronts was over. But America still believed the oceans would protect her. She woke up too late. And when the question arose, what tanks will we send against the German ones? The answer was none. Factories were rusted, engineers scattered across car companies. They had to start almost from scratch. The first answer was the M3 Lee Tall, awkward, as if assembled from two different machines. Its main gun was mounted on the side of the hull, while on top sat a small turret with a 37mm cannon. It was a compromise, a desperate attempt to catch up. The Americans simply didn't know yet how to mount a large caliber gun in a fully rotating turret. The metal couldn't handle the recoil. And yet, the Lee was sent into battle just to buy time. It was on the wreckage of that strange machine that the M4 Sherman was born. It was designed in just a few months. They took the reliable chassis of the M3, reinforced the armor, welded the hull instead of riveting it. A 75mm gun, a gasoline engine, but powerful. The key was production. Thousands of units could be built like cars on an assembly line. The Americans weren't chasing perfection, they were betting on quantity. And they won. But at what cost? When the first Shermans arrived in Africa, the British were thrilled. After their Crusaders and Matildas, the new machine seemed like a miracle. You started it in the morning, and it worked. The gun shot farther, the armor was stronger. They even affectionately called it Old Sherman. But then came the first battle and everything changed. The Battle of El Alamein. Sand, heat, blinding sunlight. The first hits and the tanks burst into flames, as if someone had opened a furnace inside. Flames shot out of the turret, and the armor cracked, as though the machine itself was screaming in terror. The British, used to breakdowns, never expected that reliability could become something to fear. It burns from a single hit, they wrote in their reports. That's how the Sherman earned its grim nicknames. Tommy Cooker, Ronson, like lighters that ignite on the first strike. Everyone thought the gasoline engine was to blame. But no, the problem lay deeper, literally in the heart of the tank. Ammunition storage. The shells were placed along the sides of the hull, right next to the armor, in open racks. One fragment, and that was it. Flames would race through the hull like along a fuse. Shells detonated one after another. Sometimes even a non-penetrating hit caused a fire. The shockwave from the impact made the rivets inside burst into deadly fragments. The crews tried to fight back. They added extra armor plates, hung sandbags, even poured concrete. But metal doesn't forgive compromises. When a shell pierced the hull, something unimaginable happened inside. Silence, then a flash. The pressure knocked the air out of your lungs. The fire instantly found oil, fabric, everything it could consume. The loader fell to his knees, gasping for breath, while the commander struggled to open the hatch. But there weren't many hatches. Two small ones for the driver and his assistant, and one shared hatch for the three men in the turret. Now imagine, 3 men, fire, smoke, and a single narrow opening above. The turret jammed, the hatch wouldn't open. Inside, everything turned into a boiling cauldron. One veteran recalled, "When our Sherman was hit, I saw the commander just vanish. A flash and he was gone. I felt the fire creeping up my back. I opened my eyes, smoke all around, screams, metal melting. I crawled over bodies, found a gap near the driver's hatch, and fell out. The tank was burning behind me, and I lay there on the sand, thinking I could hear it breathing. This story was later retold in factories, on training grounds. That's how the idea of wet stowage was born, a system that saved hundreds of lives. The shells were placed in steel containers, filled with a mixture of water and glycol. When the tank was hit, the liquid spilled out and extinguished the fire. The ammunition was moved down, beneath the floor. The chance of ignition dropped from 80 to just 10%. But for those who burned in 42, it was already too late. By that time, the Americans themselves had entered the fight at the Kasserine Pass. Young men, yesterday's farmers and students, they believed the Sherman was invincible. But standing against them was Rommel the Desert Fox. He knew the desert, he knew people, he knew how they thought. The Americans attacked head-on, while the Germans struck from behind the hills. Their 88mm guns turned tanks into blazing wrecks. Sand, fire, panic. Many never even realized where the shot had come from. After the battle, the survivors said, "We thought we would win with technology. But it turned out victory belongs to the one who knows how to wait." When the war reached Africa, things became clearer than any textbook could describe. The Sherman wasn't a miracle, it was a compromise. It could drive far, shoot accurately, be repaired quickly. But it could not forgive mistakes. And the enemy understood that. The Germans didn't just shoot, they hunted. Their guns were like surgical instruments, precise to the millimeter. First came the Pak-38, a 50mm anti-tank gun. It could pierce early Shermans from half a kilometer away. Later, it was replaced by every tanker's nightmare, the Pak-A40, 75mm. Its shell flew at nearly a kilometer per second, punching through armor as if it were paper, and a second later, it exploded inside. Inside where the men were. And then there was the 88mm flak, an anti-aircraft gun turned tank killer. Even pilots feared it, and now tankers did too. One shot and a Sherman's turret would fly off like the lid of a pot. Those shots were like a sentence, sound, impact, flash. No chance. The Germans knew exactly where to aim at the joint between turret and hull, at the front projection where the ammunition was stored. They didn't fire at random, they fired methodically, with cold precision. Every Sherman burning on the battlefield was proof of their superiority. And for the crews, a reminder, you're alive only until you're in someone's sights. The Allies for a long time didn't understand what was happening. They wrote reports, the tank burns for no reason, the ammunition detonates instantly. But the real cause was simple, the internal layout. Shells along the walls, fuel beneath the floor. The crew like men trapped inside a box of dynamite. One officer later said, "We built a tank like a house, but it turned out we built a furnace." Sometimes, when the shell didn't hit the side but struck the turret, death didn't come right away. First, a flash of light, then instant darkness. Metal tore through the air, the sound hammered your ears, as if someone was squeezing your head from the inside. A second and the smell, gunpowder, oil, then silence, only the crackling of fire. The driver might still try to escape, his hatch was closer to the light, but those in the turret were trapped. One gunner recalled, "I heard the flames hissing under my feet. It moved like it was alive. I wanted to scream, but I couldn't, my mouth was full of smoke. When I crawled out, I couldn't remember how to breathe." In the archives, the inspection reports of tanks after battles still remain. Almost all the same. Complete burnout of the fighting compartment, hatches unopened, and sometimes just a single line, crew killed instantly. But what does instantly really mean? On paper, just one word. In reality, a few seconds that stretch into eternity. You'd think that after the first tragedies, the command would act. And they did, reinforcing armor, changing layouts, adding new hatches. From 1944, the hatches became oval. Spring-loaded, they could be opened with one motion. The loader finally got his own escape route. Now there was at least a chance. But even then, the tankers joked, "If it catches fire, we'll open all the hatches at once. Maybe the smoke will leave before we do." Laughter, the only armor left when everything else is powerless. Panic in battle was a separate circle of hell. When one tank ignited, the others pulled back as if the fire could jump across the sand. Crews of nearby machines saw people leaping from the hatches, engulfed in flames, and were afraid to look. One British soldier later said, "The worst thing isn't seeing a tank burn, the worst thing is hearing it burn." Even those who escaped were broken inside. After a fire, men refused to go back into their old tanks. They asked for new ones. Some even repainted their turrets, just not to recognize the marks. But metal doesn't forget. In the heat, it still smelled of smoke. Among tankers, there was a saying, if you press your ear to a Sherman at night, you can hear a faint knock as if something inside is breathing. A whisper of steel. Superstition, of course. But those who had lost their friends believed it. Mechanics who worked on recovering damaged tanks used to say, When we approached, we always listened first. If it was quiet, it meant we could start working. If it hissed, it meant the fire inside was still alive. Sometimes they had to wait for hours until the metal cooled. The flames kept burning inside. And only when the hatches were opened did a blast of hot air rush out. There was a saying at the front, if a Sherman catches fire, run farther from it than from a German. The ammunition inside could still explode minutes after being hit. And sometimes, tankers who tried to rescue their comrades died nearby when a remaining shell inside suddenly detonated. And then came the mines. If a Panzerfaust decided everything in an instant, quickly, brutally, a mine dragged it out, as if unwilling to let go. An explosion under the tracks tore off the road wheels, shattered the suspension. The tank remained alive, but helpless. It couldn't move, which meant it became an easy target for artillery. In Italy and the Pacific, mines were laid with cunning wired to unexploded aerial bombs, hidden under wreckage. One incident on Okinawa became legendary. A Sherman rolled over a mine connected to an aircraft bomb. The explosion threw the 30-ton machine several meters into the air. When it came crashing down, the turret was torn off. Out of 5 men, only 1 survived. He crawled out, stood beside the tank, and watched it burn. Someone filmed it. And today, that footage remains one of the most haunting records of the war. City dust, soot, the smell of burnt metal and flesh all blended into one. Tankers used to say, when a Sherman burns, you can hear it even without sound. You can hear it because it isn't just fire. It's steel screaming. There were nights when crews resting in reserve woke up to strange sounds. It seemed as if somewhere nearby, metal was hissing and groaning. Some said it was just the wind through the cracks of turrets. Others, that it was the burned Shermans calling to their own. Superstition? Maybe. But everyone tried not to sleep near destroyed tanks. Not because they feared an explosion, but because sometimes it felt like the machines were still alive. Britain and the US were beginning to lose faith in the invincibility of their technology. The more tanks they built, the more funerals followed. Behind every Sherman, 5 names. And behind every name, a family, a home, a town, now waiting for a letter. Sometimes that letter came with a piece of a charred dog tag. Sometimes with a photograph found in a uniform pocket. The mechanics who pulled out those photos never told the families where they came from. In the accompanying documents, they simply wrote, "Soldier found in vehicle, condition indeterminate." In the battles for Italy, the Shermans were used as battering rams leading the way, breaking through walls, clearing paths for the infantry. But every evening, when the fighting quieted down, the tankers would sit beside their machines and look at the armor. It gleamed in the moonlight, cold, silent. And someone would always whisper, "Just don't catch fire tomorrow." When the gunfire faded and the smoke began to settle, the battlefield turned into a heap of twisted iron. Some Shermans still stood alive, breathing smoke through their vents. Others were already silent, charred, blackened, their hatches open. Around them reigned a silence that rang louder than any shot. And then they came out. Mechanics. Men without medals, without fanfare, without songs. Those who saw the war closer than anyone because they had to open what was left inside. They approached the tank carefully. First they listened. If it hissed, it meant the fire inside was still alive. If it was quiet, they could open it. They came with crowbars and sledgehammers. Sometimes the hatches were welded shut by the explosion, sometimes jammed by the twisted hull. They tapped on the armor, listening to the sound. If it was dull, it meant empty. If it rang, it meant someone was still inside. Then came the moment of truth. You opened the hatch and a rush of air burst out, hot, heavy, with the smell of smoke, oil, and something impossible to describe in words. That smell never left you. The mechanics used to say, after the first time, you're no longer the same. After the 10th, you stop speaking. Sometimes, everything inside was burned clean. The metal shone like glass. Of the crew, only shadows imprinted on the walls. Other times, it was the opposite. Everything was still there. Charred straps, uniforms, letters, unsent, photographs. All of it stuck to the armor, as if the machine itself was trying to preserve them. If the tank hadn't burned completely, the sappers would move in. After that, the tank was washed out with water straight from hoses, then repainted. A week later, that same Sherman could be sent back into battle with a new turret, a new crew. None of them knew who had sat there before them. Only sometimes, as they took their seats, someone would feel a strange cold beneath the chair. They said metal remembers. Sometimes the mechanics found strange things. In one tank, burned out near Anzio, they discovered a small toy car inside a child's tin model. The commander had carried it as a good luck charm. When the tank went up in flames, the toy melted into the armor, and later, during disassembly, no one could separate it. It remained part of the machine forever. Another case in the Ardennes. A Sherman stood right on the road, its turret blown off, but the hull almost intact. When they opened it, they found a note stuck to the dashboard. Written in a trembling hand, shaken by vibration, it said, "If someone is reading this, it means I didn't make it." There was nothing else inside. Those who survived later said that the scariest thing in a tank wasn't the fire and not the explosion, but the silence afterward. When everything around goes quiet, you sit there in your headset and hear only your own breathing. It smells of metal, sweat, and gunpowder. You're alive, but no one else is. And that silence is heavier than any roar. Some couldn't bear it anymore. They transferred to the infantry, to repair units. Some just disappeared. Others asked to be moved to the Stuart, a light tank, weaker, but with a smaller chance of burning. But most stayed, because someone had to keep driving these machines forward. Among tankers there was a tradition. Before heading into battle, they would sit on the armor and remain silent for a minute. Not praying, just silent. Each thinking about his own thing, home, the sky, or simply wishing to live at least until tomorrow. Then the commander would slap his hand on the turret, a sign it was time. And the Sherman came alive again. The engine roared, the tracks screeched, and the column moved forward as if nothing had happened. But the metal remembered. Every shot, every impact, every name. Somewhere inside, between the layers of steel, the screams seemed to leave their imprint. And sometimes at night, it felt like they came back quiet, like a whisper of wind. The mechanics used to say, "That's not the wind, it's those who didn't make it out." In one letter home, an American officer wrote, "When a tank burns, it screams. But if you can hear that scream, it's already too late." He was killed 2 days later. The letter was found in his pocket, slightly charred, but still readable. It was delivered to his wife. After the war, when the tanks were sent back for smelting, the workers told strange stories. Sometimes, faint clicking sounds could be heard in the steel as if someone were knocking from inside. They joked about it, but still worked wearing headphones. Someone once said, "This steel doesn't want to become something else." The Sherman became a legend not because it was the best, but because it survived. It outlived those who built it, those who burned inside it, and those who cursed it. It remains in museums, on memorials, in films. Children take pictures beside it, smiling. They don't know that once, inside, there echoed the silence of death. And yet, if you step closer, place your hand on the armor, you might feel a faint trembling, almost imperceptible, like breathing, hidden beneath layers of paint and steel. Sometimes it seems that if you hold your hand there just a little longer, you can hear something whispering. Maybe it's only the wind, or maybe it's memory. Because steel never forgets. Never. And this is only the beginning. Because the real story doesn't start when the tank burns, but when it cools, when they open it and see what's left inside. But that is a story for next time.